What does it look like to rebuild your faith as we're coming through COVID? That's what we're talking about in today's podcast. Are you ready? Because it's time.
Holy nuclear time bombs! Holy overeating! Holy roller coasters!
It's time!
It's time.
It's time for the Lion Sidekick Podcast!
Hello, heroes. This is Tom Pounder, and you are listening to the YM Sidekick Podcast. This is the podcast where ministry leaders learn some tips and tricks and ideas on how to do ministry more effectively in this very digital and online world. And today we have Ben Kerns back on the podcast. Ben is a good friend of mine. He's been on the podcast numerous times, but he hasn't been on the podcast in quite some time. And the only thing I can say to that is the fact that Ben and I have been just knee deep in doing ministry in our selected areas. He's out on the West Coast in California. I'm out on the East Coast. And we've just been doing a lot of ministry during this pandemic. And we just haven't had a chance to catch up and talk. But I'm glad we had this conversation today because, you know, during the pandemic, we've talked a lot about our mental health and how people are overworked. And I've had it on my podcast before, and I'm going to have it on my podcast again because this stuff about mental illness is not going away. But one thing I haven't talked about too much is about our faith and how COVID over the past year and a half has really reshaped our faith a little bit and has actually caused people to lose their faith. So what does it look like for us to rebuild our faith? Well, that's what Ben and I are going to talk about today, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with them. So, without any further ado, let's get into the conversation right now with Ben Kerns. All right, with me right now is the one and only Ben Kerns.
Woo! Let's go.
Let's go. Ben, I haven't talked to Ben in quite some time. It's been a long purple haze, if you want to say, I mean, where we have not chatted very much. But Ben is a good friend of mine that we met via Orange in the Orange conference and blogging and all that stuff. But and he's been on the podcast a number of times. But for anybody who hasn't heard of Ben Kerns, Ben, why don't you go share about yourself, where you're from, and what you do?
Yeah, I'm a lead pastor out here in California. Land of fruits and nuts. That's what everyone likes to call us. And, did youth ministry forever and ever. And, back in our youth ministry glory days is when we kind of got all connected. And now God's, had us go to do some different things, but we still are serving the church. And we haven't talked in a long time, which is actually kind of some of the stuff we're going to be talking about because this season of COVID, we've been trying to just gut it out, save our jobs, figure out what in the world's going on. And in the process of that, some of the fun, joy-filled things of goofing off on podcasts. I realized I haven't written in my blog, in a really long time.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Just fried all the time,
Yeah, it has been a weird, interesting time. I mean, again, at the time of this recording, COVID's probably like a year and a half, year and 7-8 months or something like that. And it's been crazy. So how has it been out there for you in California? In your church in particular, how have you guys done with COVID?
We tried really hard to be generous to our context and to be warm-hearted and let the people who are really fearful and the anti-government people to try like idiots. We try to keep them all together, and that's been really costly. I tried to be like you. We updated our online service tech, and we made this huge investment to have a decent online service opportunity. And now we're doing both. We have an online service and we have an in-person service. And in our context, everyone is all masked all the time.
Yeah.
And kind of a trip doing church with people with just their beady little eyes, And then, and I don't know about you too. And then like with children, like families are just like over the last year and a half, Zoom church didn't work for them, got out of the rhythm. Now sports are back and they're just not come back to church. And so our church was a little older and a little sadder, actually.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. I mean, again, people got out of the rhythm of doing in-person church and making Sunday morning a priority. And the convenience of online church was very convenient. You could watch anywhere. That's what I always like to say too, is like, watch it anywhere, watch it in your bedroom, watch it in the bathroom, watch it in the hotel room, wherever you want to watch it. And I think people got out of the rhythm of going to church in person. And again, I don't know about your church, but we've suffered a big decline in church. And, we had a big uptick in online church for a while. And then as it went more and more in person, online attendance went down, but it didn't make up, the in-person attendance didn't make up for the decline in overall online. So we've hit a big hit. How has your church been?
Yeah, I mean, same thing. We had a little bit of an uptick on the online, now we're slowly just building back our numbers. We're probably 60% of what we used to be.
Yeah.
And then talking with other pastors, and we talk too, and there's budgeting and staff fatigue. And, you mentioned a bunch of staff, your church had a bunch of turnover, and our church so far hasn't. But one thing that I noticed, which I think, we talked a little bit about, which would be good conversation. And for people in your listening community, I would love to know their thoughts too. But because we don't want to need to be super vulnerable, I'll just tell a story of someone on our staff who is just crashing and burning. She's a leader in our youth ministry. And, because of her innovation and her care for kids, and she's a high achiever, every sort of chaotic thing that was thrown at her at our student ministry over COVID, they just absorbed. Oh, online, boom, here's Zoom. Oh, here's a fun YouTube channel way to interact. Oh, we're going to go and bring meals to kids and show up in their front yards. Oh, I mean, every sort of innovation, back in person, not in person, backyards, just innovated all the way through. And truthfully, our youth ministry is our strongest ministry at our church. It's the one ministry that has life and is growing. But what's crazy is now that's been a year and a half, realize that this person is just struggling, and not struggling professionally, but struggling internally, and realizing she's made some agreements in her walk with God. Her faith is kind of on the ropes. She's on the verge of burnout, but yet she's performing really well. And you're not only just the most handsome online guy out there, but you also you're a resident, you're a workaholic too. And I'm just curious, maybe for us and for your listening audience, the people who are still in the church, we gut it out because we're hard workers, we're entrepreneurial, we have this high sense of call, and I know some of our other friends have pulled the trigger because it just became too much and it became too inauthentic, and they got out. And I know for me and for this woman, and maybe even for you, there's some agreements we had to make. We kind of pushed kind of the more touchy-feely parts of our faith, the more authentic parts of our call kind of had to just be put on the side while we just did just gut this season out. And so I'm just curious for you, if there's a moment of pause, how do you reincorporate, that kind of softer, squishier part of your walk with God and your sense of call, bring that person back to this kind of overworking, achievement, entrepreneurial burnout version of our faith? How's that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you're hitting on is really important, because there's two things that I'm hearing, and two things I feel like I've been dealing with. One is, I've incorporated a lot of unhealthy habits, extremely unhealthy habits. While our church was online before.
What are some of those habits? Give it to us, Tom.
Because I work all the time. I wake up at 5:00 in the morning, and I work. And I watch TV and that kind of stuff, but I'll work. I'll have the computer in front of me. I'll be working. I'll go in the office or work from my home office, which is where I'm at right now, and I'll keep on working. And then I'll have lunch and for a few minutes, and then work. And then I'll have dinner for a few minutes and then work again. Like, I'm working until I go to bed. Like, I was working until like 8, 9 o'clock at night, sometimes even 10 o'clock, shut my computer, go to sleep, wake back up 5 o'clock and work. I mean, it was just nonstop because there was so much to do. And that's why I'm curious about you real quick, is for us, we were already online. Our student ministry was not very much online. We had some social media presence, but not online like what we went into. And so I felt like we were ahead of the game, and we were still working like nonstop. And again, we lost probably 6 or 7 staff members over the course of the year and a half that we've been doing this. Where were you guys at online before? Were you streaming your services before or no?
No, we were at zero. We were believing some of the writing and study out there that basically said online church was for numbskulls, that all you're doing is teaching people to not be a part of your church because you're never going to get to compete with all the bigwigs out there. And
Yeah.
so we thought about doing it like 5 or 6 years ago and looked at the cost and looked at the size of our church and we're like, we can't pull it off. So we had zero online. We posted our sermon like a week later, which
Okay.
would be like the best we could do. But we went from that to a year and a half of innovation and spending a ton of money and hiring a couple staff to, we got a whole like production room team.
That's cool.
For this tiny size of our church, I think it looks like our church is probably like a couple thousand people, like as long as you don't zoom out and look in the room, and just the quality and what our team was able to pull off. But that was really costly on a ton of levels for everybody to figure that out.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this a little bit more, because I think what you hit on were two really important things, but they're separate. One is we became all workaholics, and to some degree, we worked way more than,
who made it. Yeah. Who are still working.
That's right. Okay. For the ones who made it. And then I think there's a faith element that you hit on, and about calling and about our own personal faith and everything like that I think would be good to talk about a little bit more. So how did you encourage this staff person in regards to her calling and her relationship with the Lord?
Well, because I'm a broken Gen Xer man,
Yeah.
I did not handle it well at all. But I think so I made her cry and
great, Ben.
I know, but over a couple weeks, we're figuring it out. But the bottom line is, as a supervisor, had to come to terms with, this is a super gifted person, and if I'm not careful, they're going to pull the plug in the ejection handle on being a pastor, being someone, a contributor to the church. And so, am I willing to have a subpar job performance for them to have some personal health? And I just have come to this conclusion that, gosh, I think that has to be okay, because performing excellently causes burnout. It wrecks people. The people who are leaving the church, were professionals, aren't leaving and are super warm-hearted towards God, just finding something different. They're pissed and bitter, and it's going to ripple down to their families. And so it's been a good check to go, I might actually need to dial back my workaholism, my perfectionism, and my expectation of that on my staff, and go, okay, maybe this next year is just about, can we recover? And if have less trauma happening in our staff. And so to really give our staff some space, some time, we ended up carving out some money for counseling and spiritual direction. We made everyone do an hours audit to make sure they're carving some time out in their life, that there's putting some boundaries back on some of their stuff. But to get back to the ooey gooey squishy call, that kind of pietistic, warm-hearted devotion to Christ, like the stuff that we in our 20s were like, that's what I'm doing, to refine that person, it's hard, and it's going to take some work. And I know for me, I'm terrified, because if I lose that part of my call, well, then what am I doing? Then it's so that gives me some pause.
Well, yeah, I think that's really important, because I love how you said that, because early on in my 20s, all I wanted to do was student ministry, and that's all I want. Student ministry is life. Like, the soccer player in Ted Lasso, he goes, football is life. I was like, student ministry is life. That's all I want to do. And I was just so much into that. But over the past year and a half, I've just been beaten down by again, a lot of it's been me, my own perfectionism, my own professionalism, and what we have as a Gen Xer, we desire to do good and perform well. And so, but when I talked with my leader, my senior pastor, about it, he asked me, okay, Tom, is this a question of calling, or are you just tired right now? And that was a really good question, because I associated me being tired with not having a call there anymore. And as I processed and I thought and I prayed about it, I still realized I'm still called to be at my church. The calling is still there, but I think it gets so muddied because we have been, unhealthy in a lot of different ways in our effort to proclaim Jesus.
So in your a year and a half of workaholism, wake up at 5, go to bed at 9, crank it all out, get it done, serve the church, be the man. If you think of like in John 15, right, when it's like, we want to be connected to the vine. We connect to the vine, we're going to bear fruit. Apart from the vine, we can bear nothing, we can do nothing. But now you're if you look in reverse, where in those like 16-hour days, are you or were you carving out space to make sure you're connected to the vine? And I know at least for me, there were seasons in there where I wasn't, and I was actually withering and I wasn't bearing fruit. My part of the being connected to the vine was this wilted and wilting branch with no fruit on it. And so I got a little kind of danger zone, like, oh, I have to like carve out some time. But the bummer is it's like atrophy. It's like if you like, you break your leg and then you don't move it for 6 months, it's not strong like you remember it. You have to start way back. And so for me to eat some humble pie and go, I gotta like start backwards and rebuild this kind of spiritual intimacy with God and rebuild my disciplines because they were atrophied. And that's kind of how I navigate a little bit. But for your hours and your days, how did you navigate it?
Well, that's a great question and a great point there, because I stopped. I mean, a lot of that connected to the vine really stopped, because what I was doing is, and again, you've probably done this before in your past, or I'm just a terrible person, but other people I think have done this too. Is like, like we started doing all these online Bible studies, and so before COVID, my mornings were like, okay, I'm waking up at 5:30, and I'm praying and I'm doing a Bible study. Tom Pounder's Bible study. Tom Pounder praying. And then
Pounder Bible study.
yes. But what it ended up happening is I started doing all these online Bible studies, and I was doing all these Bible studies just because I'm the online campus pastor. I need to contribute to these Bible studies. So I'm doing the Bible studies not for Tom Pounder's spiritual development, but to speak into these, chat groups and all this kind of stuff. And honestly, I stopped praying. I stopped praying like I used to. Now I have incorporated prayer into different aspects of my day-to-day life, but it wasn't to start off my day praying for my family, praying for my work stuff, praying for specific things for me. It was more of, what am I doing for other people? And that's where it's really dangerous.
So I agree. And that goes all the way back to, to my conversation with this staff person, which was, dude, you are so gifted. She's seriously one of the most gifted people I've ever been a part of. And to watch her, begin to untether her performance at a church from her own inner faith and development, I'm like, oh my gosh, well, if you end up getting too comfortable there, you're going to, at some point you're going to wake up and realize you're not even a Christian anymore, working for the church, and you're going to fully deconstruct and implode. Or if you get totally unhealthy in your walk with God, right, then that's going to rear its head and then fully impact your professional development. And so I feel like caught it early enough to go, gosh, those two things need to become retethered. And even if it means, not as good job performers in the short run, the long run, going, I want this person to serve the church for 40 more years. Which means maybe this year is going to be one of the least productive years. I mean, I even think a least productive year, but her and the rest of our team moving towards health will help our church be stronger in the long run. But it's like doing that same thing personally of going, gosh, we haven't been connected to the vine. And even as an organization, maybe we haven't been connected to the vine. And some of our ooey gooey spirituality is atrophied a little bit. And so this is the season to gut it out and to go back to the things that worked and to re-gird up spiritually so we're prepared for whatever this next season is going to be.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things too, where I will say one of the things I stopped doing as well was I stopped taking a Sabbath, like a full Sabbath. I would take like Saturdays, I would like take a little bit of time off and all that kind of stuff. But the reality was I wasn't taking a full Sabbath. And I remember when I was early on in youth ministry, again, the whole ooey gooey stuff that you're talking about. I remember that when I was working with
that thing, the thing.
that thing. I remember when I was working with Young Life at a period of time, and they talked about going and doing a day away with the Lord. And I dug that. I was like, this is awesome. I'm not a hiker or anything like that. You're probably a hiker and you surfboard and all that kind of stuff, surf and stuff. But like, I'm not much of a hiker, but I would go out into the parks and just sit there with my Bible and my notebook. And I would just jot down stuff and I would pray and I would spend a few hours down there. And I've really gotten away from that as well. And so again, when I'm having this conversation with my senior pastor, he's now holding me accountable, like pretty hard about taking that time and taking that Sabbath off because I'm completely unhealthy on that way.
Yeah. I'm super curious, as whoever listens to your podcast and the blogging and your online world, I just think that's, you do such a good job of providing so many tools and resources, and you're such an expert in the online space, and you're super encouraging on Twitter. You're always the top of my Twitter feed every day.
Well, because I post like nonstop, but I mean,
love it. But what I'm saying is, I think your space is, you're a servant to people, and you always provide such really helpful resources and tools. And so I hope the conversation isn't too off brand, but but I think it is a helpful thing that we cannot fall away from our first love. And there's no tricks to it. There's no this is the new resource that's going to make that happen. It's all the stuff we did, when we first did it. And, for those few of us who are still left serving the church, is going to keep getting fewer and fewer, gosh, it's even more and more important for us to make sure that the core foundation of what and why we're doing this is worked out or working out.
Yeah, and I think this is why, I mean, again, I've talked on the blog and, podcasts about, staying healthy and all that kind of stuff, like mentally and physically, but spiritually healthy, I haven't talked very much at all. So this is why I really love this, because again, it starts with a conversation, and you had a conversation with your staffer. I had a conversation with mine. So if you're feeling this way and you're listening to the podcast right now, and you're feeling this way, I really feel like it starts with having an honest conversation about where you're at, because again, it's been such a blurry thing lately, and we confuse our call. God probably has something great for you. And again, it means sticking it out, but it also means reclaiming your faith, reclaiming your passion. I love what you talk about, not forgetting your first love. We got into ministry because of our love for Jesus and our love for people to hear about him. And again, we've been beaten down with work and work and work. We've got to start reclaiming our faith in a big way.
Dude, look at you, super pastor, and
just
your online community. And Tom is a much better pastor than me. So if that's a conversation you need to have, he's the man to have it with. So
no, it's not. Totally not. All right, Ben, this has been great. What other final tip would you share as we're kind of wrapping up? I love this. And again, it's a starting point for people to have, because again, we're in this midst of a great resignation. I mean, a lot of people are resigning.
That's right.
And it's not just ministers, it's all over people, but what can ministers do to kind of reclaim their faith more?
Yeah. I just think, we already mentioned this, but I just think at the end of the day, it comes back to that picture in John 15, being connected to the vine. Apart from him, we could do nothing. And so, at least for me, a big chunk of my energy has to be not just producing, but to making sure I'm connected. And we're all different. So we all have different disciplines and different tools and things that we did when we were first in love that worked for us. So I don't have those. I don't know how to do that for you personally, but I do know if our posture and if our thinking is, if we're going to bear fruit, it begins by being connected to Christ. Gosh, that's the thing that I've been really wrestling with. I'm trying to get our staff to wrestle with. And yeah, I think for those of us who haven't resigned or can keep serving the church, we got to make sure we're connected to the vine. I do feel bad though, because this isn't the normal, helpful, tips, podcast, but I think in the comments, for the record, I did want to talk about anti-vaxxers or critical race theory or using TikTok to date. Those were the things that I wanted to get to. So if people want that, bring me back and we'll go all the way.
Yeah, you always got to throw something in there towards the end of the conversation that, you always got to throw something in there. This is a great conversation.
Make it all the way to the end, it's just a nugget for them.
Gosh. I appreciate it. Ben, I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate that you love 90210 just as much as I do. You're a fellow Gen Xer. We have the same birthday month. I mean, it's just, kind of a nice thing, and
Things. And so maybe for us and like everyone else, we can't let COVID crush our natural rhythms of friendship and encouragement. So
there you go. Hey, Ben, how can people get in touch with you if they want to say, hey, dude, this guy's the lead pastor. I got to talk to him a little bit more.
Oh boy. I don't even know. Real Ben Kerns, that's me on Twitter.
Yeah, follow you on Twitter. Yes, follow you on Twitter.
But I end up liking conspiracy theories, so that's probably not the best sense of who I am. I don't know. Ben@burncovenant.org. You send me an email and we'll connect, but Tom's a better pastor, so make sure you
Gosh, that's awesome. Okay, fantastic. Ben, well, as always, it's great to have it. I'll have all his links in the show notes so you can kind of follow up with Ben. So Ben, thanks so much, man.
Adios.
All right, so there you have it. My conversation with Ben. He always throws something in at the end that will talk about something that just will throw me for a loop. And here he goes. He throws me for a loop at the very end as well. But I love it. I keep it in my podcast, and I love it. But I would love to hear your thoughts. What stood out to you from this interview today? How are you thinking about your faith? And how are you thinking about your calling right now? Does it need to be rebuilt in some way? And what are you doing to rebuild your faith so that you're not questioning your calling, but you're just really rebuilding your faith? I would love to hear your thoughts on it. So definitely hit me up on Twitter @TAPounder, or you can email me at tom@ymsidekick.com. I would love to have this conversation carry on. So feel free, again, hit me up on Twitter or on email. I would love to keep this conversation going. All right, heroes. Well, thanks so much again for joining me. As always, you can go to iTunes or Spotify or actually any place that you get your podcast at to follow along and get these episodes to you. Or you can go to ymsidekick.com. There I've got my blog, the podcast, some vlogs, some ebooks, and information about the Digital Bootcamp Facebook group, the free Facebook group that you can go to and learn some digital tools and trends that are happening around the world and that apply into our ministry context. There you can get all that there at ymsidekick.com. All right, heroes. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. And until next time, have a great one.